Welcome students to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Pekhom Basu. I am a guest faculty at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. In the series on history and ideology, I will continue with Indian ideologies in the medieval period, talking about Zoroastrianism and Islam and their arrival in India in this particular module. We will try to develop a broad understanding of medieval India. Medieval India, if you recall from your history lessons in school, extends for centuries and is dotted with many invasions and conquerors coming into this country. So it is important that we have a broad understanding before we delve into religion. The next objective is to understand the advent of Islam in India. Unlike Vedic religion or Jainism or Buddhism, Islam was not born here. It is in that sense something which came to us from another part of the world. We will then develop an understanding of Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is also, so to say, a foreign religion. And then the role of religion on cultural ethos of the country as a social worker is extremely important to understand, especially given the context and the times that we are living in today. So this module, in a sense, will help you to contextualize the advent of other religions and the socio-political context in which they arrived in India. The previous module, especially on ancient India and Vedic religion, gave a bird's eye view of the Vedic religion, which emphasized the differences in the origin of the religion and how it is practiced today, and the coming of Jainism and Buddhism almost as a rebellion religion in that context. So similarly, in this module, we will attempt in brief to give an overview of Islam and Zoroastrianism. The context of medieval India is extremely important, and I would request every student to refer to the e-text and look at the list of references given, because it is impossible to cover the length and breadth of medieval period, and also to understand in depth the religion and the consequences of the religion on the socio-economic period of the time in this kind of a module. So please do go back to the e-text and read as much as possible. The medieval period for this particular module, the time period is 8th to 13th century AD. There again there is a lot of debate on the time period, but the popular notion is that it is from 8th to 13th century, which means that it begins with the death of Harshavardhan. A lot of, in that sense, I would call them orthodox historians, would see the reign of Harshavardhan as the last Hindu ruler. But you also have to understand that in medieval India, there was no India as we understand it today, and there was no concept of one religion, one dominant religion. Because we've already seen that in ancient India, we already had Jainism and Buddhism. So to say that medieval India starts with the death of the last Hindu ruler, paving the way for Islamic invasion, is not correct. So therefore, we have to refer to the books again. But briefly, medieval India, in a sense, was a bunch of principalities. There were small principalities and there were powerful kings. Many of the principalities were further divided into jagirs, and each jagir controlled the land and the people. They were the subjects. which is what paved the way for feudalism, almost similar to serfdom in medieval Europe, but not exactly the same, because here in medieval India, we also inherited the caste system of ancient India. So therefore, we had very clear distinction in terms of labor. So the lowest caste were the ones who were engaged in physical labor, and they were the ones who were tilling the land. They were the ones who were also burdened with financial burden, like paying taxes, while the Jagirdar was somebody who was enjoying his privileges. And the ruler or the king was the one who was providing protection in return of the taxes that were forwarded to him. So it was a period of economic stagnation. It was a period of the common people being disenchanted. It was a period of political fragmentation also, because, to repeat, there were many principalities and there was no notion of India as we understand it today. Seeds of modern India's economic and social problems were already being laid in medieval India. So what we see today, what we have inherited, a lot of it began in medieval India. This is the context in which we look at the invasion. Now, the invasion of the Turks. Across worldwide, at that time, invasions were very common. The Turks had invaded Persia. In a sense, that had led to the fall of Zoroastrianism as a religion in Central Asia, and from there the Turks moved on to India. The Turks established the political military control over the region that they captured. They did promote Islamic culture. The caliphate became the sultanate. The caliph was too weak to assert his authority at this time. What had happened was that in the Islamic world, the caliph is somebody who has both has the religious as well as the temporal powers. So he is somebody who is not only the head of the religion, but also the notional head of the entire geographic region, wherever Islam is going through the conquerors. So but at this point, when the Turks invaded India, the caliph was already weakening. The power of the caliph was weakening. And therefore, it was easy for Mahmud of Ghazni to assert himself as the sultan. Polity and economy were still evolving. And in this situation, we see how Islam came to India and evolved as a religion within the Indian context. Because if you see today, the Islam practiced in India and the Islam practiced in the Middle East, there are differences also. There are, of course, similarities because it is the same religion, but there are also differences in practice. And that is because of certain acclimatization that happened to Islam when it came to this new territory, medieval India. The word Islam means submission of will to God. Like Jainism or Buddhism, this is also a monotheistic religion, and therefore there is only one God. The basic tenets include the declaration of faith to one God, and Muhammad is his messenger. We also have to understand here that prayer or namaz is something which is common to all religion. It is not something which is exclusive to Islam. But while in the other religion it may not be enforced, in Islam it was practiced. Fasting is also again something which was already there even in Hinduism. Here again it was something which was in Hinduism also there are specific days when fasting was recommended. Similarly, even in Islam, fasting was recommended during certain periods in the year. Zakat was a tax which every follower of Islam was asked to pay, and Hajj is the pilgrim, the pilgrim that a follower of Islam is supposed to complete in his lifetime. Now, both even in Islam, for example, through like during Roza, while there was emphasis on fasting, there was also a lot of emphasis on charity. So charity is something which is ingrained in the religion itself, whether it is during Roza or whether it is during Zakat or even in Hajj, where you are supposed to contribute for the expenses of somebody's Hajj if he or she cannot afford it. So these are certain things which are inherent in Islam. Yes, it is the conqueror's religion as it was interpreted in a lot of historiography. And here I will repeat, when you choose the references, please look at historians across all schools of history, because each historian brings his or her own political ideology and interprets history in a certain manner. But it is important to understand as a social worker that we are aware about our prejudices, and we have to therefore read history from that standpoint. It's just not when in the field we are aware of our prejudices, but even when we are reading something, we have to be as objective as possible. Like most other religion of the period, the holy book is Quran, which is written, and Shariat is the law that governs all Muslims. The earliest contact of Islam with India began at the beginning of the 8th century of the Christian era through Sindh and Balochistan. The real contact, so this was the time when there were trading happening. This was also the time when there were skirmishes happening, but the real contact began only when Muslims came in and settled down in India, and this began with the conquest during medieval India, and that was when there was a lot of exchange in terms of culture, language, and art. Persian was adopted as the language of the court and of literature. Now, this is also very similar to Sanskrit, for example, in Vedic religion. Here, because it was the language of the conquerors, they brought in Persian here, though Persian was not till then, it was not the official language in India at that point of time. So it was the Turkish rulers and subsequent emperors who brought in this language. So while they excluded through Persian as the official language, they excluded the common people of the country in taking part of in the affairs of the government. It also became the dominant language of the time. But this also led to the creation of a new indigenous language called Urdu, which was essentially a mixture of Persian and Hindi. So while Persian excluded, it also aided in the development of a new language. The other influence in Islam that we see is the belief in the unity of God and the growth of indigenous monotheistic faiths. So what happens here is that just as in ancient India, there were Jainism and Buddhism was a response to the orthodox Vedic religion that was being practiced. The influence of Islam is also seen later on through the Bhakti and the Sufi movement. And as you will see later, one of the byproducts was the Sikh religion, where Guru Nanak is somebody who believed in the unity of God, and therefore he wanted to. He already sensed the seeding differences between Islam and Hinduism, and tried to bridge the gap through Sikhism. To summarize Islam, you have the context of the religion is, we've attempted in this module to demystify the context of the religion. It has to be seen as something which, as I said before, conquests and invasions were very common in medieval world. India was no different. Yes, it just so happened that Islam was the dominant religion of the conquerors at that point in time, but it was just that. It has to be read as a standalone event in history. The religion itself is similar to all other religion. Charity is ingrained in Islam. It contributed to the development of new language, literature and architecture. And like every other invasion of the times that took place across the world, it brought in cultural exchange. And from Islam, we now move on to Zoroastrianism. I'll just briefly, the difference here, and that is a stark difference, is that so while Islam came to medieval India as the religion of the conquerors, Zoroastrianism actually came in as the religion of those who were seeking refuge. To reiterate, as I said earlier, Islam had first come to Persia, Iran, and then from there it came to India. Now, Zoroastrianism was the dominant and the official religion of Persia at that point in time. Also, it is one of the world's oldest monotheistic religion. Now, to elaborate further on Zoroastrianism, it was founded by the prophet Zoroaster or Zarathustra in ancient Iran, approximately 3,500 years ago. It was the official religion of Persia, which is now known as Iran, from 600 BCE to 650 CE, so almost 1200 years. And it was political persecution of the conquerors that forced followers of Zoroastrianism to flee from Persia, and a considerable and they fled, and it just so happened that a few of them fled all the way to India. Just to give a brief history of the political situation in which Zoroastrianism found itself in that era. In 632, Abu Bakr, the first caliph, who became the head of the Muslim Ummah, initiated the expansion of Islam beyond the borders of the Arab world to include the lands of Sassanid Iran. In 635, Muslim forces won a decisive victory at Al-Qadasiyah over the armies of the last Shahinshah, Yazdargar III. So again, just with Islam, this is the brief background of Islam in Iran. In 637, they seized the capital of the Sassanid state, and it was under the Abbasids that real persecution of Zoroastrians began. So what happened was that while in 637, a little before 625, when they started the attacks, the invasion on Iran, they came in and they settled down, but for Zoroastrianism to be replaced by Islam, that took another few years. And it was only in 752 that it started happening. And from 10th century onwards, Zoroastrians immigrated to India. And once they were here, they came to be known as the Parsis. Menand writes in an article in 1901 that a small troop of warriors and priests fled Iran and landed at Sanjan, South Gujarat, in 716 AD. So this is brief. So almost. If you look at advent of Islam in India, and if you look at the advent of Zoroastrianism, the time period almost coincides. But as I said, to repeat, one was the religion of the conquerors, and the other was the religion of those seeking refuge. It was a Hindu prince, Tadiena, who gave the Zoroastrians permission to settle in his territory and the Persians submitted to certain obligations given by Hindu culture. So therefore, it was as early as 716 AD when they agreed to adopt the culture of the country, or of the region that they were settling in, which is why even today they continue to wear Indian clothes, and the language that they adopted was Gujarati, the language of that particular region where they had arrived. Zoroastrians believe there is only one God called Ahura Mazda, and he created the world. Ahura Mazda revealed the truth through the prophet Zoroaster. So it is very similar in that sense to Islam. In Islam too, you see the truth being revealed to the prophet Muhammad. Zoroastrians traditionally pray several times a day, as all other religion followers of other religion does. They worship communally in a fire temple or agyari, and the holy book of scriptures is called the Avesta. The Avesta is split into two sections. The oldest contains the Gathas, which are essentially hymns, which are thought to be composed by Zoroaster himself. The younger Avesta, or the newer one, are commentaries to the older Avestan written in later years. It also contains many myths, stories, and details of ritual observances. The followers of Zoroastrianism, to sum up, evolved over the years as an educated class who went into different professions and were also well versed in business. Again, charity is ingrained in them, and even today you see that they are some of the leading families in India on charity are followers of Zoroastrian religion. They settled in a new country, they became a part of it and continues to practice their faith. I repeat, it's one of the oldest religion in the world and it still survives, though through a dwindling population today, but it is still there. As for Muslim invaders who invaded India, they too settled here. They became part of India's ancient heritage and contributed richly to it in terms of language, music, cuisine, art, and architecture. And they also adopted customs and food habits that belonged to the subcontinent. To sum up, the advent of Islam and Zoroastrianism in medieval India. Medieval India had certain socio-political, economic problems. The common man was burdened at that time. The situation is not very different from what he's experiencing today. The idea of India did not exist in medieval India. However, conquerors and conquests were very common across medieval world, and in that prevalent situation, Islam was just another religion that came in with the conquerors. It only found its foothold in India when some of the conquerors settled in India and adopted the language and culture of this country. While they brought in their language in terms of Persian, it also contributed to the growth of new language. What is important to understand that the advent of religion cannot be separated from the political situation of those times. What we often as social workers we have to keep in mind is that we need to remember the context in which a religion had come into the country. While Islam was the religion of the conquerors, Zoroastrianism was the religion of those who were seeking refuge. And both today have adapted the Indian context and have contributed to its rich heritage and culture. Both had charity imbibed in the religion, and it did talk about the rich empowering the poor. However, today we have moved away from the context of charity, though it continues within the within the religion based organizations, but we have also moved towards rights-based social work. I hope this module helps you to contextualize religion, and please do read up the reference list given in the e-text. Thank you.